I know. This doesn't look great, and I'm sure many of you are here with the same flicker in their eye as later, when the charm breaks. But I promise you, this isn't completely McKellen propaganda despite my collaborator. I wouldn't take on Miriel unless I was confident in the material. So take a deep breath, and if you get angry, just remember.
Very well, let us both learn together. Heresy is not native to the world. It is but a contrivance. All things can be conjoined.
Baby batteries is a topic I've thrown around quite a bit throughout my videos, and the importance of the power generated by the sacrifice of new life is foundational to the governing powers within Elden Ring, as well as a multitude of religions in the real world. We see them attached to the legs of knightly figures in an ancient, sacred, and forbidden mausoleum, clutching to the chest of finger and death spell casting mages in ancient, sacred, and veiled catacombs, presumably allowing these scholars to persist long after death. On the abductor virgins, who were likely forged in the rancorous spirit-infested lava of Mount Gelmir, and who reflect these very spirits only when submerged in this molten crucible, and as I've previously theorized, as a vital component of Ascension rituals. The importance of birth, rebirth, and the role of the womb, as well as the bounty of the Maidens, their progeny and their sacrifice, are demonstrated time and time again. The very face of Meta, the mother of the sacred Two Fingers, who resides in the finger-birthing chamber, is of striking likeness to the sigil of the Black Flame, the symbol of the Glomide Queen, who single-handedly swaddled each godskin and whose serpentine association alone puts her closer to birth than most else, given the godskin summoning snail snakes that drop the swaddling cloth, and the serpent Amnion in the ancient snake church guarded by one of her nobles. In fact, this very sigil and Meta's head both are eerily similar to the anatomical depiction of a womb, not to mention the depictions of presumably her and the swaddling cloth upon the weapon of her serpentine minion, the godskin peeler, which is a representation of Aphrodite or Venus, the goddess of love and fertility. But we also see this theme repeated in the Veiled Maidens, who I refer to as the Maidens of the Cycle, or Sacrificial Maidens, who were born to die. We find them in their youth, and in their death, at places of life and places of death, as youth within places of death, and even coddling new life, much like we find the eternal maiden Marika holding Mesmer, and who also takes the form of both the Sigil of Life and the Sigil of Death. Another veiled motherly maiden is of course Fia, a veiled sacrificial deathbed maiden who gestates a great rune in her womb, giving Godwyn new life, much like the Amber Egg or Godwomb does for us and Renala's children, and Bok technically. This process and the importance of it is something I will be exploring in depth in my next long-form video. But for now, suffice to say that the role of the Miranda flower in this cycle is second to none. Even Fia, the prime example of the capacity of a womb to gestate a great rune, is complemented with the iconography of a Miranda on her back. It's a Miranda spear that we see wielded by the imposing statues of this mysterious female in Leyndell, representing her divine authority and power, adorning the regal flower motifs of the Queen's bedchamber, on the very flags of Leyndell, and on the deceased figure of Elphael, shriveled and dead like the one wielding it. And of particular importance, it bears a striking resemblance to the gold sewing needle of Radagon, whose talisman shows him sprouting these same flowers. As its file name would suggest, the rune-eating flower is a powerhouse of a vessel, and one recognized for its capacity to both contain and conduct the benedictions of the heavens in the form of spears of light, the very features seen in the progeny of the sacrificial tree maiden, such as the conjoining of these concepts in Melina, a sacrificial maiden who casts both bloom and minor Erdtree blessing, and whose spirit becomes a minor Erdtree after death, some even theorizing her body became a tree after her original physical death, like the remains of the Jar Shaman, who otherwise may have become these tree guardians, saints made from sinners who are already said to be part tree. Or like the Empyrean blood burgeons and the growth of the Halig tree fueled by Empyrean blood, or the grandmother of the flowery shaman village and her tree, and so on. It's both the power she can wield and thus disperses upon death, and the progeny or scions that she produces, that are the bounty of the rune-eating flower, of the sacrificial maiden. The womb and its bounty are depicted in Elden Ring as jars, wielded by these very maidens who would be the foundations of the civilizations they were a part of in each age, or cycle. The jar is in essence a gestation chamber, like the womb, as we see with the jar shaman and their flower crucible. And to extend upon this, what we see depicted as the blessing of the Erdtree is in essence life, just in a purified or basic form, that which comes from the womb. I believe this is presented to us as both in-game text, as well as contextually and through environmental storytelling. And man, I was having a great time exploring these wonders until I realized Miyazaki trapped me into writing a hit piece on a character so beloved it would surely induce a mass madness proc. And yet, here I am. It's that smile. It's that goddamn smile. And so you can imagine how giddy I was when I noticed while I was taking shots for another video that the landmass for the Church of Vows looks suspiciously like a larval tear. And what's more, the church itself at a bird's eye view looks like a jug like the ones depicted being held by these maidens representing their womb and the bounty within. In fact, it's a jug that is made in the likeness of the female reproductive system, with astonishing accuracy, with Miriel in one of the ovaries, and a Nox statue in the uterus, surrounded by water like an amniotic sac. If we extend upon this, then the bounty of the church representing the union which assured Ranni's birth spilling out as roads linking aspects of Ranni's life is particularly potent, especially when also compared to the umbilical cords coming from the larval tear. We in essence have a microcosm of Ranni's entire life, being represented by the bounty spilling forth from the jar of this larval landmass, and the roads being the umbilical threads or cord connecting the story. It couldn't be more birth-coded if it tried. The roads lead to Raya Lucaria, where she was, in my opinion, secreted away and protected, safe from the Golden Host, to the depth of the eternal cities through which her mother led her to meet the Dark Moon and her snowy master, actions that would shape her entire destiny and, again, in my opinion, her eventual rebirth, to the catacombs hiding the secrets of her era-defining sin and involvement in the Night of Black Knives, and the tower that hides her body and sin guarded by a very peculiar serpentine noble, beneath which is the village that represents her shaman roots. And importantly, something to remember for the future, paths that lead to the very origins of her ancestry, and the madness that the roots are mired in. In fact, to back up this whole concept, we even see this exact same thing in Lanedell, with the Erdtree Sanctuary being this same structure representing the female reproductive system. We find the miracle of the Church of Vows, the celestial dew right by the Erdtree bow, linked to the side that has a path made of roots that leads directly to the nameless eternal city. Like the Church of Vows hints to the eternal city's influence, given its statue and function with the same celestial dew, also leading to the Colosseum of the Age of the Crucible, and Gransax, a connection I will be exploring in the next video, and the other ovary leading to the Queen's bedchamber, and the Erdtree. And the path pouring forth from the building leads to the secret of Radagon and Marika, a perfumer praying to this sacrificial figure coddling a bud like a newborn, and a crucible knight, one of the warriors of Marika's first consort, specifically the one holding a weapon in likeness of the primordial Erdtree, with the path fittingly leading to a dead end. We even have an important figure suspended in a crypt chair in the Erdtree Sanctuary, much like we see Marika suspended within the Erdtree. This body is suspended in the same place the statue would be in the Church of Vows, surrounded by the amniotic fluid in the womb. If this figure is a revered one of the eternal cities as we've seen, and watches over a secret miracle that could make or break the very foundations of a new order, then we would expect this figure to be of equal importance, with an equal trove of secrets and ambition to match, and that would seem to be the case. The veiled figure in a crypt chair reminds me of the figure from Elfale we talked about earlier, wielding the wilted version of the flower spear the Lanedell goddess statues carry and appears to be a perfumer, a group closely associated with flowers and secret gardens. They are sitting on a crypt throne of trees, exactly like the veiled maidens of the Eternal City and their crypt throne with a tree on its back, or the grandmother of the Flower Maiden village and her crypt tree, or Marika's remains, suspended within the Erdtree. This figure is so esteemed that they are veiled, suspended, and revered in the Erdtree Sanctuary, holding the very original doctrine of the Golden Order Principia, which contains the rings of Radagon and the means by which we can reveal his secret. So, seeing a turtle in this location makes complete sense, believe it or not, given what the church is made in the likeness of and represents, and what turtles represent historically being symbols of longevity and fertility. After all, the singular mention of procreation was mentioned on the original item description for turtle neck meat. A splendid lengthy cut of turtle neck meat. Turtle meat is said to boost virility, but none in the lands between seem to have much appetite for it these days. In the lands between, the urge to reproduce has waned long ago. In various creation myths, the turtle supports the world or even gives birth to land, as if to be the foundations of it. And that is exactly what Miriel is for the foundations of the union between the Erdtree and Moon. This is even reflected on the root shown on the back of the Viridian Talisman, which we fittingly received from the Miranda plant boss, and the subsequent ones in locations pertaining to the roots or progeny of the ultimate flower maiden, Marika, Morgott, Mikola, and Godwyn. And this is the very same root pattern we see reflected on the back of both the single and double-headed turtle talisman, reinforcing this association of the turtle with roots that can join and spread. However, there is something a little off about Miriel. A few things which may pull into question him being located here in this representative ovary. First off, he talks. Weird, probably not something to overlook. Secondly, when he talks, every word and every sentence is a lull into heresy. He is willing to spill an outrageous amount of presumably quite private tea, and every time he does so, it ends up being an important and heretical piece of information. Just like finger reader Enya and burning the Erdtree the moment the fingers are stun-locked and presumably not listening. As well as just lore dumping on us about the Rune of Death and how necessary it is, even though we literally never, not once, asked. Talk about Radagon? Oh, he has a huge secret that I'm pretty sure is hidden in his statues. Renala? She has a secret egg that helps her cast forbidden rebirth magic and is currently in a clinical depression. Do something a little too spicy? Try a celestial dew miracle. AKA mind erasing, sin evasion, oopsie water. What's that? You have a book of profane and forbidden heretical magic. Merely a contrivance, a tool by which we can learn. Things that if spoken about with literally any member of the Golden Order results in their repulsion, insanity, or substantial stun-locking. The Turtle Pope openly encourages heresy and the learning of profane rites, something the finger readers themselves strictly and overtly forbode. Except for Enya, who is legitimately suspect. Perhaps the Pope hat serves the same purpose as the masks of the Spirit Guardians, Curse Blades, and Sickly Rulers. The pretty and timeless illusion of royalty and authority, hiding the truth beneath, like the multilayered, planned and hideous form of the grafted scions, hidden beneath a beautiful and resplendent cloak, which looks suspiciously like a turtle shell from above in the official art. Or perhaps more accurately, like the Mask of Ansbach, presenting the appearance of a kindly old man supporting his warm and welcoming words in a harsh scape, while cloaked beneath is a fierce and hardened warrior capable of injuring an Empyrean that Melania even calls the most fearsome, fighting a god and sporting a history drenched in the blood of maidens. The illusion of a kindly weak old man is undone when we see him fighting like a demon, and against a new god. His kind and tempered, considerate words.
Righteous tarnished.
Lulling a tired tarnished in a broken land into the righteous heresy of killing a god. Just like the end result of Ranni's journey, the product of this very church. So is Miriel lying about who they really are, about what their intentions truly are? Is his presence in this womb church sporting the statue of the people that invoked the ire of the greater will an auspicious one, or something far more sinister? Is Miriel as we know him just an illusion, like the mind-erasing miracle of the church or the illusion of Radagon and Marika alluded to in both of these locations? After all, as Ranni says shortly after lying to us about her identity,
the lands between are home to lies and cheats aplenty.
And that's supported perhaps by the most important aspect of Miriel that confounds me. Miriel is big, which is ordinarily fine, and which we could chalk up to him being simply the oldest. We have big dragons, octopus, crabs, dogs, birds, and so on. But the important difference with Miriel is that there is only one of him. All of the other models that use his large one are the illusory ones that seal away secret, mysterious rises. And every other turtle is your standard size, across both the base game and DLC. The interesting thing about turtles and size, however, is just as we see with the many larger varieties of many other animals within Elden Ring, the larger variety are often female, and in many but not all cases, it's in order to carry the eggs. Dragons, octopus, crabs, lobsters, demi-humans, and so on. So Miriel presents as a male, but his form would suggest female, and the only other models that share his design are illusory. And you know what? That reminds me of a few other people. Many, actually. And of the holy or divine kind, in fact, even so far as donning hats representing divinity or holy authority. Ymir wanted to be the foundations for a new era, the holy mother of a new generation. Just as Miriel wished to also be the foundations of a new era, a priestly father figure working as the force that would conjoin all things. Fitting, given just like the creation myths featuring turtles as foundations of the world. The Nordic mythology of the Titan Ymir is of its body being used as the foundations of the earth as well. While Miriel is presented to us as a fatherly figure despite his form suggesting a motherly one, Ymir is presented as a nurturing motherly figure despite his male form. Yet, what lies in truth beneath this facade is shown to us in our battle with him and the alternate form of his outfit. This merging of motherly and fatherly figures in sacred, divine, or holy figures is just like the illusion of Radagon, who is Marika, or the many other shape-shifting illusions we see. I think this association is given further credence by the gift imparted to us by Miriel, the Golden Needle, and the fact that not only is it related to Radagon by way of both his sigil of order that holds things together, like himself and the remains of the Elden Ring, with his own golden hair and his statues becoming the very lattice that is his rune, much like the golden hair as thread through this conjoining needle, but also the fact that he himself is known for his skill in the craft. This is flipped yet again in the journey of Bok the Seamster, who took up the craft in honour of his seamstress mother, and once more in another dual gender-coded godling, Mikola, who uses his needles to literally stitch his sister together with unalloyed gold, a technique perfected likely by knowledge imparted to him by his father, who is also his mother. And to bring this thread full circle, George, who is personally obsessed with turtles, had a large role in the world-building of Elden Ring. And he has said before he is heavily inspired by Tolkien, and so it's fitting that, in addition to this poem he wrote about a giant turtle, one of the only references to the name Miriel I could find was Miriel Serindi, one of the most significant elves in the Silmarillion. Her name Miriel roughly translates to Jewel Woman or Jewel Daughter, much like the twin jewels affixed to the Turtle Pope's hat. She was known as Serindi, meaning the broideress or the one who embroiders, famous for her delicate and beautiful handiwork. This culture of deception, identity, and body swapping, that's so overt it's covert, ritualistically rubbed in our faces like the inverted sigil of the fire giant sporting an eclipsed sun at the top of this new order, which was once the bottom of the old, or the statue of Marika's greatest secret being allowed to remain in the capital for anyone to discover as a cheeky, mischievous tongue poke in the form of an illusion, is all on purpose. I theorize it's born from both necessity in order to perform a grand plan in secret, as well as the signature of Marika and her kin of vicious mockery towards those who wronged them. It's that smile. It's that goddamn smile. And we see this in its most obvious form yet, in Marika's mischief, a Nox-coded item akin to the shed skin of a snake that allows one to change their form or shed their skin, and which is found in a castle absolutely brimming with items related to the Gloam-eyed Queen, and even an overtly covert nod to the Divine Gates, the highly questionable and suspect relationship between Marika and the Gloam-eyed Queen that we have explored in previous videos, such as her Gloam-eyed daughter and snake-coated son. The striking comparison between the manner by which the godskin guarded Aegale is hung in his church and Marika in her statues and the Erdtree. The startling similarities between her cape and the snakeskin at Bonny Village, and much more you can see here, is one of the ultimate forms of this illusion and rewriting of memory and history. There's so little information about a seemingly incredibly important figure that it's almost like a celestial dew was used to make people forget who the Gloam-eyed Queen really was, despite it really being quite in our faces. After all, Marika to the denizens of the Shadowlands is a betrayer and strumpet with a vile progeny of snakes, while to the denizens of the lands between, she was the Golden Eternal Queen. Until the Shattering. Like the change of quote-unquote Marika's statue as a symbol of life in the Shadow Realm to a symbol of death in the base game, we see a similar change in the eyes between seemingly younger and older turtles. From a solid gold in the older horn-bearing turtles, to a full eclipse in the younger ones, the ones that share Miriel's model. And given Marika's own ties to the Gloam-eyed Queen, isn't it interesting that the High Priest of the Carians appears to be a Nox-coded turtle? And they also appear to have such close connections to the godskin and snakes, with their children being located close by them in critically secret locations, as well as their very crowns appearing outrageously serpentine, and royal gems sharing a striking Gloam resemblance. The very mechanism of the church Miriel presides over is a grand illusion, the erasure or manipulation of memory. And we can surmise as much given the ambrosia created by Celavus from the same materials in the same fashion as the one referred to as celestial dew works by erasing the mind of the one that consumes it. In this instance, instead erasing or manipulating the memory of others about you by bathing yourself in the dew, which interestingly is much like the process of rebirth, which is accompanied by the loss of memory. But for the church, a figurative mass rebirth and memory or sin wipe, much akin to a baptism. And this tie is only further strengthened by the presence of the sigil on top of the celestial dew, being found in the Lunar Queen's bedchamber. But why, and how does this relate to the shaman? If Miriel is hiding something, what is it? If the turtle of the mind-washing church wants us to forget something, like Marika appears to want us to forget about the origin, appearance, and unconfirmed mortality status of the Gloam-eyed Queen, what could that be? Especially if this secret has something to do with forgotten transgressions, like those who previously inspired the ire of the Greater Will suddenly being front and center in this mind-wiping church that is the foundation of this era-defining union. Miriel is heavy, a saint who is a conjoiner who carries and is weighed down by the memory of the sins washed away in the church and forgotten by all else, just like the shaman carry the weight of the sins of the guilty upon their back, the guilty grafted to them. In many ways, this knowledge is his power, and power he is able to grant to others, as a prolific profane gossip. Others forget, while Miriel remembers, all the while technically making saints of sinners by erasing the memory of their sin, charming victims into seeing the person who wronged them as a saint, while holding on to their secrets to share as they see fit, like PR and a blackmail operation all in one. His shell, like the jar of the shaman, or their far-off lineage and their cape, hiding their hideous form and secrets. Or like the shell of another very important, very sus illusory shelled creature that isn't what it would seem, that really brings this very full circle. Hidden deep in a cave in the north by the first church of Marika is a spirit-summoning spirit snail. This mischievous, invisible spirit summoner conjures the warriors of the Gloam-eyed Queen, and drops the very swaddling cloth that was used by her to swaddle the godskin. But this is in fact not the only place we find such a snail. Hidden deep in the Road's End catacomb, the only such one displaying a goblet of Farah Mazula, where we even pick up the Raya Lucaria soldier ashes, which is complementarily located right by the Moonlight Altar as opposed to Marika's church, also has a spirit-summoning snail. This one, however, instead summons a duo of Crucible Knights, the Knights of the First Consort of Marika, and like the serpentine cape and progeny that link these mysterious and elusive, illusory women. This illusory shelled creature is in fact not a snail, but a snake. Appropriate then that it's the sacrificial maiden Ranni who gives us the spirit-summoning bell. So am I calling Miriel a snake? Well, what I'm not calling him is a liar. By omission, perhaps, maybe. But directly? Surely not. Right? After all, his secrets and tea are accurate. And that is why I find it interesting that it's Miriel who says,
I cannot be wounded. I cannot die.
Despite that seemingly being incorrect. Much like Rykard when we quote-unquote kill him.
I servant never die.
And as we know by the Blasphemous Claw's item description, this serpent was an ally of Ranni, much like how this turtle that conjoined the houses resulting in her birth is resting in a church whose roads tell her entire life story. In fact, the only other creatures with any references to reproduction are specifically noted for it, such as the octopus and its ovaries, which appears to gestate our runes after defeating us and promptly spawns several offspring. Just look at it. Feasting on my runes. But even then, this thing just reminds me of a ball of snakes with a beak, like the abyssal serpent behind Messmer's eye, snakebird of Eglay's church, or the womb wheel of the virgin abductor, which one could argue is in the likeness of a cage divinity, as a divine cage, like the bird-claw-eyed, destined death-wielding sacrificial tree-flower maiden that was raised in this secret cage, whose brother is a decaying fire snake. We have seen all of these symbols together many, many times, and of particularly important note, across different ages and cultures. Trees, flowers, birds, and snakes, it's there, every time. But why? The answer is because that is the way in which all things have been conjoined. That's how the divinity is caged and bound into a mortal frame. And just as I have explored in previous videos, it's knowledge used to cage divinity that would be used to break it free. All of the methods of the Greater Will turned against it in a multi-generational plan. This multi-generational plan is hinted at in both the base game, but most recently again in Night Rain as the plan of the Cutting Gifted tribe, which many have theorized is meant to represent the shaman, like how grafting cuts appear so similar to Marika's rune. Maidens representing both flowers and trees, such as in Marika, her progeny, and her village. And the very cave alluding to this plan is host to a motherly sacrificial flower maiden and her 3 scions. 3 sister scions, or royal cuttings, of a mother progenitor, parts of a tree, of the same stock, like Godwyn, the scion of the Golden Bough, or the very Melina-like Black Knives, who are scions of the Eternal City and of the same stock as Marika. And we see this in the flower maidens, the shaman, and the trees that grow from their remains, just like the tiny trees that grow beneath the Miranda flower in the boss's chamber. And so it's fitting then that the cultures we see that are tree-centric are covered in both flower iconography and conjoining iconography, most commonly this, or similar reliefs. The destruction like whipping, conjoining like jarring, and purification via subsequent rebirth as a saint is a process critical to alchemical theory. But the meaning behind this conjoining symbolism is the subject of the subsequent videos, and will be in-depth explorations of previously touched upon alchemical theory. However, for the sake of understanding the concept and relevance of conjoining, one need only understand the concept of a crucible. A crucible is a mass conjoining of souls, resulting in power generated from the death of life, as described on the regal ancestor horn and seen in practice multiple times. The real kicker is, just like with how the flower crucibles of the Jar Shamans work, or the construction of Ene Ilim, or the chambers and form of Rykard, the very roots of the Erdtree are all one in the same, crucibles, and that's what's reflected in these conjoining roots. These reliefs are found in the real world, ripped part for part. And just like numerous other examples we will one day explore, their meaning translates to the game with impressive accuracy. We can see this represented both with animals intertwined in these vines, and also without them, though still representing the same thing, a conjoining motif between cultures and lineage, a conjoining force. And we can even see this idea of the snake being a grand conjoiner, or almost biological crucible in both the more overt motifs of divine locations like Ene Ilim, on vases with people looking like they are in the belly of a snake, or this giant relief spiraling like a snake with the entire history in its belly, with even a woman seeming to be talking to a snake, of the bird-snake hybrid of Igle's temple, where the serpent Amnion rests and a profane birthing ritual is referred to, reinforcing birth as a crucible-like mechanism given the description of the godskin's body as crucible-like in nature. And this is as we see in the ancient dynastic ruins, including those in the DLC in the shaman jails, on the divine towers, wings of the gravebirds, and more. These conjoining vines are present to represent the function and guiding principle of the age before the Erdtree, the necessity and supremacy of crucibles, and snakes as a mechanism of them. There are real-world mythologies, such as the cosmic rainbow serpent in indigenous mythology of my own country, wherein shaman initiates would be swallowed and regurgitated by the rainbow serpent as a part of their rebirth as a spiritual guide. And we see all of this in the serpent god's curved sword, which described ancient sacrificial rituals to an ancient serpent, upon the volcano of Mount Gelmir. This is very reminiscent of the fire giants and their forge, which we see used to sacrifice maidens, and we see quite a few notable crossovers between serpents, fire, and giants. There appear to have once been 4 serpent-like reliefs flanking each direction of their forge, just like the serpentine-like tail flanking their shield. If all giants share their red hair, then the size of Melania, Radahn, Ranni, and Messmer would suggest this is true. And Messmer is quite literally fire and snakes incarnate, while the third child of the giant Carrion trio is also quite literally a snake resting in fire. He even uses serpentine-like hexes of Gelmir, which is a volcano and was a site of ancient serpent worship and sacrifice as per the serpent god's sword, with the Taker's cameo's ability being exactly the same as the sword's. So isn't it interesting then, that in the age of the Erdtree, where knowledge of the crucibles is so scarce even Crucible Knights journey in search of information about them, and any signs of them are locked away and shunned, and the serpents who were once revered as gods and vines conjoining all are now referred to as traitors? That the sigil on the back of the turtle shell, the beast that conjoined the houses of the Erdtree and moon, is these same vines. A strikingly similar pattern we see on arguably the Divine Tower, in wreathing this beast, which are the foundation of great runes, and in Night Rain an array of divine trees. Upon the walls of Raya Lucaria, resting between these ancient statues from Farum Azula, whose own Elden Ring is covered in roots, and whose rune formation fits very neatly into this pattern, almost like it's what the relief intended to represent or depict. And of particular note and importance, in the Church of Igle, the altar of the serpent. But why and how would serpents, which are seen as an enemy of the Erdtree, be a motif we see representing vines, especially in the cultures that refer to such beliefs as ancient and whose equivalent incantations referred to as hexes, with even stronger ties between this serpentine religion and the fire giant's forge drawn by the comparison of a serpent attempting to harness the fury of a volcano, and it being called arrogance. Why would the blasphemous Rykard take up the mantle of this ancient religion? Incredibly enough, both this initial reverence for and then move away from serpents as symbols of resurrection to symbols of heresy and paganism, in addition to their depictions as the roots or vines conjoining things to banished, is expressed perfectly in the Christian relationship to Celtic and Viking paganism. Saint Patrick was responsible for the conversion of many Celtic pagans to the Christian faith in Ireland. And in the Book of Kells, this initial Christian conversion of pagans was accompanied with imagery of the serpent as symbols of connection and resurrection. Like the resurrection of Christ, as a serpent is reborn when it sheds its skin. Serpents were important icons to the high-ranking clergy of the pagans, and so their inclusion as symbols of rebirth flanking 2 of the most important icons of Christianity, the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, in not suggesting close ties and kinship, was a tactic employed to foster conversion. After all, as most know, snakes in the Christian faith are associated infamously with the devil or temptation, false beliefs or idolatry. While to the Celtic pagans they represented their roots in Ireland, so the subsequent symbolism of them being chased out by St. Patrick and driven into the sea is potent. This was also done with the Celtic pagans with trefoil symbolism that St. Patrick employed to help convert them to Christianity, lulling them into heresy with familiar concepts like a triple deity, Mother, Daughter, and Crone. How about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Ultimately chasing away the pagan beliefs, while converting them with symbols of familiarity like the shamrock to the trefoil, a gentle lull into heresy. The conjoining roots, which are snakes, being instead reflected as vines, is also heavily reflected in Viking artwork, which is a prevalent motif found in Elden Ring from Farum Azula to Godfrey's Axe, a culture which, like the Celtic pagans, also fell under Christian suppression and conversion, as declared on gelling stones, like the greater gelling stone of Harold Bluetooth, with one face showing a lion or great beast entwined with a serpent. In Viking motifs, we see the animals themselves as these vine-like patterns, like the crucibles of the shaman and the lids in likeness to this Viking artwork, and these vines also represented as serpents. Serpentine imagery has been consistent from the migration period through the Viking Age in Northern European artistic and religious expression. Vikings depicted serpents in various artistic styles, including the gelling, mammon, and Erne styles, and they were often shown intertwined, forming complex patterns, and sometimes incorporated into larger decorative schemes with other animals. Just like in the Celtic-Christian crossover, serpents held an ambiguous position in Norse culture, representing both protective and destructive forces. They were associated with wisdom and power, but also with chaos and destruction. Jomungandr, the Midgard serpent, grew so immense that it encircled Midgard, grasping its own tail. The serpent's presence maintained cosmic balance, though its eventual release would herald Ragnarok. Then there's Nithog, a malevolent serpent that gnawed at the World Tree's roots, whose presence in the mythology represents a constant threat to cosmic order, as its actions could potentially destabilize the World Tree that connected the 9 worlds. The poem Völuspá specifically mentions Nithog as having corpses in its wings, suggesting a complex hybrid creature rather than a simple serpent. Despite this, serpentine imagery features prominently on runestones throughout Scandinavia, often on ones remarking familiar ties or marking the death of family members. The gelling style particularly emphasized serpentine interlace patterns which served both decorative and possibly protective functions. And serpentine artifacts have been found in numerous important Viking burial sites. The importance of these cultural ties will be a focal point of an upcoming video, but their prevalence is undeniable, and what these roots represent to Celtics, Vikings, and Christians, and how they are presented, in my opinion, speaks to the truth of the quote-unquote roots mired in madness, the Celtic and Christian crossover of serpent motifs, and the Viking duality of the serpent as a symbol of familiar ties and protection, as well as abyssal and cosmic unbalancing powers, are all seen in Elden Ring in essentially the same manner. To me, one of the most compelling concepts in favour of the snakes being the roots shown as vines that combine is the fact that aside from Messmer's base serpent smacking us around like a ragdoll briefly, the only creature we face that is remotely like an actual snake, snails aside, is the ulcerated tree spirit, which is found often near the roots of minor Erdtrees, with small trees growing from it and with the file name Snake Soul, sharing an eyebrow-raising similarity with the snakeskin of Bonny Village at an aerial view. This is no doubt why the royal Sir Messmer is fused with winged snakes, and becomes one himself, and why even young Miquella dons a serpentine ring, akin to intertwined vines. This is why we see almost draconic snakes as vines on the officials' robes underneath royal robes, right above the Miranda motif, and why so many highborn nobles were willing to follow the red-haired, serpent-coated Messmer into the Shadowlands. Why we see a serpent-like tail coiling around the shield of the fire giant, like they're forged with these serpentine reliefs sealed in the north like those with serpents within them. And of the serpentine godskin whose body is described as crucible-like. This is why in the ancient and forgotten Eocade, we see the very depictions of the beast. A lion comprised of snakes, and an abundance of feminine snake iconography, all the way back to the urns motifs of Rao and the intertwining patterns of the ancient dynastic ruins. This is no doubt like how the Celtic pagans' religion was born again into Christianity, a snake shedding its skin and being reborn. We see the same move away from serpentine imagery despite it being the literal roots in Marika's move away from the gloam-eyed queen. Remember, just as Miriel says, heresy is merely a contrivance, all things can be conjoined. In the Christian context, this analogy would make every word out of Miriel's mouth poison, like the venom of a snake, to fool us into heresy, conjoining, entangling us all in sin. And that is why Rykard returned to these heretical practices, which are his pagan roots. His entire existence is intended to be an affront to the order that conquered and oppressed their serpentine lineage. Messmer and Rykard's form represents the hideous truth of the monstrosity that was made in the pursuit of godhood. A monstrosity created as a result of their arrogance in pursuit of divinity, that would ultimately destroy and devour them, returning the power that they stole to the roots. The red-haired, small giant Radagon is represented by his conjoining lattice and his conjoining needle and thread and conjoining marriage. He even holds the Elden Ring conjoined within his own body, as he carries the sins of Marika. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an alchemical reference, given the process of creating a rebus being emulated in these examples. Uniting of the two principles, preparation by destruction and purification, sealing in the correct vessel and gently heated in an athanor or alchemical furnace, followed by the chemical wedding, and finally the rebus. Dual-gender gods who are masters of illusion is one of the oldest tales in mythology, and it most certainly wouldn't be the first time we would see a lunar serpentine transcoded godling ruling things and making plans from the shadows in a FromSoft game. We see this in Marika and Radagon, Miquella and Trina, Rykard and Evangeline, and even the distilled version of these aspects in the Albinaurics, male, female, beast and the birthing droplet. The human variants of these Carian creations crawl on their bellies as their curse, just like the children of Rennala, who herself is also reduced to crawling on her belly like the snake depicted on her crown. Ranni's corpse has no feet, Radahn uses Leonard to move, and Rykard is quite literally a standing serpent, existing as he is in defiance of the gods. A genuinely incredible analogy, spitting in the face of the curse God put upon the serpent for leading humanity astray. It truly puts into context this amazing unused line of his. And that is the Illusion of Miriel. Behind the facade of the kindly turtle pope and his silly hat is the silent lull into heresy, toward the ending desired by those that invoked the ire of the greater will. A reverse St. Peter teaching pagan beliefs and magic while wearing a pope hat and residing in a church. The very same serpent whose words of poison deceived Eve into the eclipse of humanity, whose legs don't work quite like they used to, rendering him cursed to forever be upon his belly. The curse of the serpent, a wolf in shepherd's clothing. If you've seen my previous videos on the Bloodstar and the Triple Moon Eclipse, you would know about the importance of the Triple Moon Eclipse and its role in blocking communication to the greater will, so I would recommend checking those out, because Miriel's very own eyes sport what appears to be an eclipse, or dark sun. So if the world snake Evangeline is Rykard, if Radagon is Marika, then who is Miriel, and who is the Marika to Miriel's Radagon? Located above the Albinauric village is the hidden Moonlight Altar, a sacred and ancient time capsule of moon-worshipping relics where we are able to see the twin moons in all of their glory. Here lies the jail containing the ringleader of the Knight of Black Knives, the old lunar estate, as well as the very lineage of the Moonfolk, and a buried secret that is an essential step in Ranni's rebirth and ascension, a series of 4 intergenerational divine cards. And buried down the bottom corner of this lore treasure trove is a particularly important rise where we find the Dark Moon spell, the legendary spell that summons the power of the Dark Moon itself, the very moon Ranni's mother guided her to, and that her snowy master taught her to fear. This rise is called Chilona's Rise, and Chilona in Greek translates to turtle, making the rise where we find the Dark Moon, Turtle Rise. And this word is from the Greek myth of the wedding of Zeus and Hera, where a nymph called Chelone refuses the invitation and is punished by Zeus by being transformed into the first turtle. The importance of the turtles to the astrologers and the Carians, the studiers and followers of the stars, is reflected in some of the most important rises in the game being named after turtles or tortoises. Aside from Chellona's or Turtle's Rise that houses the Dark Moon, there is another rise located close by to Miriel that appears somewhat vaguely like a turtle shell from an aerial view, like the Royal Scions, and that is Testu's Rise. Testudo is the Latin word for tortoise, but if we pick the word apart, we can gain far more meaning. The word is comprised of testa, which means pot or shell or earthenware, and udo, which is a noun suffix for thing or creature characterized by. So testudo equals the shelled one, or tortoise, and by extension any shell-covered structure. This is because, very fittingly, the testudo formation was a military formation where a group would encase themselves in a shell like a tortoise to advance on an enemy position or entrench themselves for defense, like the impenetrable fortress of Raya Lucaria. And what extends upon this metaphor is that in Japanese, the word tetsu means iron. And just like within Miriel, within this iron tortoise are unique paintings, or memories. The very thing manipulated within the Church of Miriel and by the Celestial Dew. Iron is of critical importance to blood, and is a base component of alchemical practice. And if the constant body and identity swapping is part of a grand plot which we have ourselves seen echoes of in Marika and the Serpentine Gloam-Eyed Queen, then the other critically important tie between these two rises, introducing a third rise, truly does bring this full circle. As just like blood, the pedestals these statues occupy are a linking element between them, and these little girls which we see upon these pedestals are present in every rise in the game, with exception to these two turtle rises, and a third hidden rise, guarded by a carrion troll, the fringe-converted rise, which instead houses a statue of Marika. And as if to signal the end of this trail, the gesture required to dispel the sealing magic of this rise is erudition, meaning great knowledge or learning. And this must be performed in front of this statue of Marika, while wearing a crown used to conceal one's face, like Selen, the body hopper. The rewards we get from this special tower talk of Haima, the adjudicator who sought to achieve peace through strength, and the Greek word for Haima is blood. And located directly in the intersection, connected like blood connects between these three special rises, is the Church of Vows and Miriel. Snakes and turtles are evolutionarily quite close, and as you can see from this branch, the order of turtles, referred to as Testudines, split into two main branches. The hidden neck turtles containing Testudo and Chelone, and the side neck turtles, otherwise known as snake-necked turtles. Ties that are blood deep, like the shaman, or the serpent image secretly hiding in Miriel's shell, like Voldemort's corpse on Quirrell's scalp. So how does this missing little girl statue answer this riddle, and what can she tell us about the figures on this pedestal and Miriel? Well, a topic you've no doubt heard me talk about before is that of spirit transferal, the art of transferring one's soul and mind to a new vessel, as demonstrated by Selen and her primal glintstone transferal. The primal glintstone Selen uses for her soul transferal has within it the shape of a larval tear, just like the shape of the landmass the Church of Vows is on, and from whom this practice originated. A fellow lore-tuber, Not Godwin, made an exceptional video wherein he theorized the creation of a spell uses the soul of a sorcerer, and much like the spirit essence in the hands of tutelary deities, it is their spiritual essence, or soul, that we are taking when Lusat and Azur pass us their spells. Their very form is an echo of the wisdom of stone, and the transience of the soul and body, vessel, or rather frame, known to the Cuckoo Knights and seen in the sentience of the Crystallians, and as per the Iron Menial, the foundation of the inanimate eternal frames that would be their soldiers. Very likely some form of soul cage, and so I find it nothing short of fascinating that these small girls we find on the same pedestal as these incredibly important and different venerated figures, as well as uniquely with a bud icon instead, on hidden graves in Raya Lucaria mimicking the ancient deceased flower maiden from Elphael, and in every rise in the game with exception to these three rises, are wearing the same sigil found on these transient grandmasters, as well as adorning the debate parlor in a rich and regal purple. Or gloam. Rises in general are essentially memory storages after all, with literal memory stones as their prize and a combined story to tell, much like the multi-generational plan to fool a god. A memory, will, or scheme, passed down generation to generation, like a grand grafted scion becoming stronger with each new generational addition. The scions of the Eternal City, the scion of the Golden Bough, the scions of the Erdtree, the progeny of the sacrificial Maidens and her bounty, all working together across generations to free the caged divinity. Add the story of a woman turning into a turtle, with the meaning of the three sisterless rises hosting different analogies to turtles, with a statue of Marika and a Eureka prompt, and the gender-swapping seamster motif with the golden needle in the likeness of Miranda's spear, and golden thread of hair owned by Radagon, with the seamstress jeweled daughter Miriel Serinder of the Silmarillion. And I believe that Miriel is the Radagon for another Empyrean, one who is a part of a multi-generational plan of scions that remember the sin they work to undo, and carry the sins of those before them, electing to become the Foundation. But that's the topic of the next long-form video, and I still have some, important points to explain. So that's great and all, but what about the whole cancer thing? Eclipse-coded or not, serpentine adjacent or not, how could I say something so unbelievably cruel? Snake is one thing, but cancer? How could I justify such a thing? Well, I don't say it to be cruel, I say it because I believe it to be the truth, based on what I have read, seen, and been shown. Does anything good truly last forever? Very possibly, however, I believe we haven't even had the chance to find out, as even Marika, in my opinion, used Radagon to do the things that she, a caged divinity, could not, and her golden eternity wasn't seemingly designed with quality of life heavily considered. Marika herself was eternal and perfect, but the world she inhabited was not. Nor were her children, who were born into her deathless world, but who would succumb to the rot of time regardless. We can picture something perfect and eternal in the concept of a true god. However, we haven't seen it truly achieved past the moniker of a title. Marika may have ascended beyond the cycle, but the rest of existence was still trapped in the cage of mortality and decay. And it would require a perfect and eternal foundation to start anew. Death being plucked from the cycle without redesigning the entire system gave us a good look at what happens when something bad lives forever. Life and death is a scourge, death root is a fatal infestation, living decay is a waking nightmare, and eternal service is a sentence worse than death itself, reducing you to nothing more than a slave to your duty and screams. And that is also the problem with cancer. It's a bad thing that doesn't die. Mutated cells that do not undergo apoptosis, or rather self-destruction, an immortal frame that shuts down the whole system, and immortality within this existence would be a nightmare. One of the defining features of turtles in Elden Ring, much like the Numen of the Eternal Cities, is that they are long-lived, near next to eternal, like the serpent that never dies but simply sheds its skin. Even gods were intended to eventually be replaced by a new generation of Empyreans, so if the multi-generational plan was to escape what came before, then that would equate to escaping a system of cycles. The cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. And what better end to an age of cycles revolving around sacrifice and rebirth, and the rise and fall of new gods, than the rise of Marika the Eternal. In a world based on cycles, an immortal frame, a constant is an anomaly or a rewrite in that world, like Miriel holding all the secrets after the memory-wiping baptisms. This is why the passing of a collective memory or will is such a potent and powerful strategy, and if that interests you, see this video here on the Triple Eclipse. Or better yet, consider subscribing in preparation for the next long form, as Marika's design rewrite was not the final product, but a cog in the machine to set the stage for the final act. Though Marika herself escaped the cycle, her own children and the world did not. Her abundant eternity turned into an eternal purgatory, and living in decay was not really all that different from living in death. An existence eternally in shutdown mode, like cancer that collects and collapses a system. Marika tells her own offspring be a lord, god, or sacrifice. She herself was all three, a lord, championing a god who was herself, who became a sacrifice for her children and the final stage of the multi-generational plan, like Roderica, hesitantly agreeing to become a part of the spider. The only children of Marika's that do not rot are the Omen twins, whose horns, if left untreated, would inevitably begin to destroy them. One of them fixes this by cutting them off, and the other embraces and perhaps even craves the wounds, seeking salvation in the guidance of the formless mother. While we do see Godwyn's face and form in the intro scene, by the time we see him, he is entirely malformed and rotting as a result of death blight. While this may be due to the way in which he was sacrificed, the fact that the finger-reading maiden who may very well have been his wet nurse willingly admits he was intended to be a martyr for destined death, leads me to believe perhaps this element of death was something already contained within him, like the divine beast of Rao, and that eventually, like Melania, seems to have been something he was destined to succumb to as a martyr to death, almost like Gowry describes Millicent's blooming as a martyr to rot, and that his death merely prompted this inevitable deathly bloom early. Rudan possibly suffers from the same curse as the Albinaurics, as not once do we see him without Leonard until his rebirth into a new vessel. This may also have explained his intimate friendship with the Boar Rider, and his closeness to Leonard akin to an Albinauric and their wolf, acting as their legs. Something else curious about him, however, is the fact that every time we see him, he looks progressively more sickly. A far cry from his face and glistening skin after his ascension. And curiously, he now is proudly showing off a lot more skin, unlike beforehand, even well before his fight with Melania, never showing any of his skin with exception to a very small portion of his face. Despite his reverence for his own father, and especially Godfrey, who are famously bereft of armor even in their older age. Given this is how we see him in his prime, and thus presumably how he would prefer to be, it's very curious how he was so covered beforehand. His own great rune burned specifically to ward off scarlet rot, and that is an aspect we see his own brother partaking in. Literally sitting in a pool of burning lava. Why would he be doing that? And why is this snake so horrifically injured as if it is rotting? Speaking of looking sickly, Rykard looks frankly awful. And if we have a close look at his portraits, he has some peculiar parts to his face, specifically around his beard. This rot-coated sickness was brought to my attention by the brilliant sanguine noble Natan, and is the same rot-coated affliction we see on his seemingly rotting snake form, and Ramina, the saint of rot. Perhaps this is why he sacrificed his rotting vessel, sought sanctuary in a volcano, replenishes himself with souls like spiritual Kitsugi, and bathes within magma to fend off the agent of the cycle. Mesmer is quite literally rotting from within, and Marika even made him special medicine for it. And as for his sister, Melina, she is literally just a spirit when we see her. We never see Ranni herself. However, her corpse when we see it appears to have no feet, and she seemed quite intent on escaping her mortal coils. And the last female demigod, Melania, attains godhood and as a result becomes a sacrifice, a martyr to rot. I believe this is the very nature of the cycle, as described on the Poison Mist incantation, and as we see in the Miranda Boss chamber, representing the role of rot in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So we have examples of the impact of this inherent sickness on males and females. But what about Mikola? We never see Mikola rotting or succumbing to a disease because he is nascent. He is not developed to a point where he has a defined gender, nor to a point that the disease or natural effect of the cycle of life would take effect and begin to degrade him, like his siblings, before he ascended to godhood and reached the stage where this disease would progress and the rot of his lineage would set in. He divested himself of his vessel, and importantly divested his soul of portions as well, including his female half, because unlike males who possess a hara, or rather a spiritual furnace to store and exert power, women have a womb, which has the extra and critical function of making them in essence the host of another life form. And in Elden Ring I believe this extends beyond mere childbirth, and to the influence and possession of outer gods, like the Virgin Mary and the Holy Spirit. or like Fear and Godwyn, or Melania and the Outer God of Rot, and why the Fell God is trapped in the Fire Giant, only able to grant a portion of its power, which is then used by the recipient, unable to access the lands between through this final, barren vessel. And that is the important difference between ascending as a male and ascending as a female, and likely the reason we see Marika ascending as what looks to be a male at the Divine Gate. Miquella cheated the system and ascended with only the necessary components required for the foundation of his Age of Compassion. Not only did he shed his female half so that he could never be inhabited or possessed, but he also sacrificed his ego and personhood to his principles and duty. He would not be the fly in the ointment, he would be the ointment. A total sacrifice of self, to embrace all in the eternal kindness of gold. The system at its best and forever, effectively rendering him a willing caged divinity, an eternal and willing slave to his duty to bring about the true age of eternal abundance Marika wished for, like an unalloyed fire giant watching the kindness of gold for all eternity. Really puts into perspective why Trina wanted to kill him to save him. Meanwhile, Ranni cheated the system in a similar but different way by divesting herself of her body and womb and anchoring her soul instead to a fake body. A body that would not decay, age, or change, frozen in time and barren, preventing her from being controlled by that thing, as she calls it. Deep down below Manus Meta, Ranni is sitting naked next to what I theorize is the front of Meta, right by this birthing hole, as one of the final steps in a several-part body and soul rebirth ritual as part of a multi-generational plan. You can see more on that in this video here. This is likely why Ranni and Miquella have near-identical speeches, with Miquella having a hidden or cut script that is near identical to Ranni's endgame speech, as well as what looks to be a moon of his own, which you can see here if you're interested. They all achieve a similar result by a slightly different formula. Marika ascended as Radagon so that the Greater Will couldn't inhabit her, and also that in some capacity she could operate outside of it as her other self to whom she is anchored. The promised consort Radahn's soul was freed from his decaying form and reborn into an eternal vessel, to which Miquella anchored his unalloyed soul. Even Rykard escaped his flesh being reborn through Evangeline, and kept the decay of the cycle at bay by engulfing himself in a burning soup of rancorous spirits. A crucible construct akin to Enir Ilim. And lastly, Ranni, who divested her vessel entirely in favor of anchoring her whole soul, alloys and all, to an immortal frame. Meanwhile, Melania is the perfect example of what happens when a female ascends in her original vessel, with a womb intact. A perfect gateway for an outer god to take purchase within. This is where Ymir failed, and was the flaw in his theory, failing to become a true mother due to having a hara and not a womb, and exploding like an overheating oven as a result. Or perhaps the reason he was so infuriated with us hurting Meta is because he intended to fuse with her. Like Rykard and Evangeline, two beings coming together to create something new, something more, like the two faces of the wooden, fire-breathing twin-bird gargoyles forming a third face between them. In a culture where they were used as sacrificial tools in an unending cycle of death and rebirth, Marika's sacrifice was the penultimate play of the multi-generational plan to escape this divine cage. She sacrificed her own personal abundance and eternity to afford her lineage the one thing they were eternally denied: choice, salvation and a compassionate embrace, the kindness of gold without order, the Eden the shaman deserved, the choice for a true and unabated attempt at Eden. No alloys, no flies in the ointment, no personality or ego behind the god. A pure vessel of compassion, the element that was sorely lacking from the shaman's lived experience and the world in general. Or judgment and cold abandonment. The revenge of the roots, mired in madness inflicted upon them by their cruel and eternal duties. A complete shutdown of the system that used and abused them, where sight and touch would be impossibilities. If Miquella represents the embrace of the tragic past of the shaman, then Ranni represents the rejection of forgiveness and the quest for revenge and, ultimately, justice. It was the immediate and inevitable decay of life that trapped divinity in a cycle-based system. the very thing Ranni divested in favor of a vessel that would not decay. And so, if it was in essence eternal and renewed decay that was the cruelty inflicted upon the shaman and all of life by the cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, then the revenge of the caged divinity would be a rot of equal magnitude, the very tools and design of the greater will, used against it once again, and seemingly by the very people that inspired its ire, long ago. So if decay and rot are the afflictions of the cycle that was the destiny of the caged divinity and its eternal struggle, what is the affliction that Ranni, one of the final products of this lineage of a cross-generational plan of escape, represents to the old order? The answer to the question lies in her new vessel. By shedding herself of her rotting, caged vessel, she became something else, an immortal, unchanging, undying, unaging frame, as per the Iron Menial, who even describes his form as a product of war. To this old order that relied on cycles of death and rebirth, she would become unchanging and immortal. She would become Cancer. If we return to these three special rises and the placement of the Church of Vows in their cross-section, the shape that occurs as a result is strikingly close to the zodiac star sign of Cancer. And so then isn't it a fantastic coincidence that the very creatures that surround Raya Lucaria and inhabit Leonia are crabs of numerous varieties, crystalline variety, death variety, even silver albinoric crabs that inflict sleep such as the one found in Carrion Manor. You can see Mikola Zolt's own video on the topic of crabs as vessels here, which is great insight into their constitution, capacity, and much more. The history of crabs and being associated with Cancer as we know today in their star sign is fascinating. The zodiac sign Cancer originates in Babylonian astronomy, where the summer solstice constellation was called Alutu, which translates to the crab. The Greeks adopted this system, translating it as Karkanos, mythologized as Hera's crab in the Heracles cycle, attacking his heel, and also as the term in medicine to describe tumors whose radiating veins resembled a crab's legs. The Romans, inheriting both astrology and medicine from the Greeks, rendered Karkanos into their own native word Cancer, which already meant crab in Latin. In the zodiac, Cancer became the standard Latin name for the constellation of the crab, while in medicine, Cancer became the technical term for malignant tumors, and just like the Snowy Moon Princess, who's the most modern of the Carrion lineage. One of the more modern ontological terms used to better describe the mechanisms of malignant cancer is malignant snowflake. However, the most interesting thing about this star sign is that in its inception, in early Mesopotamian astronomy, the tortoise briefly represented the summer solstice constellation that later became Cancer, symbolizing a shelled liminal creature marking the sun's turning point. The forgotten original form, like a memory of a previous identity being erased. Another fantastic nod to this concept is that Cancer is shown as a lobster or crayfish in many traditions, because medieval artists misinterpreted the Greek word karkanos and drew shellfish they recognized instead. We see this in game as well, reflected in the similar effect and descriptions of the prawn and crab meats, which are not only close to one another, but also reference each other, with the description suggesting crab meat is the true product, while prawn has quotations suggesting it's a knockoff. Tetrabiblos lists Cancer as being ruled by the moon. The moon's rulership gives Cancer associations with water, cycles, fertility, intuition, emotion, and protection, reflecting the moon's phases and its influence over tides. In essence, it symbolized the solstice gateway and was a significant marker of the turning of the seasons and sun. Hecate is a liminal goddess, ruling crossroads, the underworld, night, magic, and spirits, and in more modern depictions during and after the Roman period, as a goddess of the moon. She is a triple goddess, most often shown holding a pair of torches, a key, or snakes, or accompanied by dogs. Wearing a polos on her head, like another revered and ancient female figure from Rao, and one of her most important temple sanctuaries is located in Laguna, specifically in Caria. These are all undeniably Carrion traits, and their association with the moon, snakes, divinity, and Cancer goes beyond the association with simply star signs. The Church of Vows, which is shaped like a jar and represents the anatomical structure of the female reproductive system, has Miriel sitting in one of the ovarian chambers, looking outrageously similar to the anatomical depiction of a cancerous ovarian tumor. The truth behind his presence in this ovary, not an auspicious sign of fertility and longevity, but an omen of the death of the system. A hideous, grafted, rancorous spirit thirsting for revenge, hiding behind a mask and posing as a kindly conjoiner, armed with a silver tongue that could sway an era. He is the one who assured the foundations that would lead to the birth and journey of the Snow Princess, the one who would bring the Nox's Age of Night, with her entire story pouring forth from the church itself. The spread of the malignant cancer that would choke the entire system and take it over entirely. The revenge of the roots, mired in madness, shown to us in a microcosm, complete with a nearby purified ruins with 2 fingers hidden underground rather unceremoniously, unlike with the usual illusory floor, buried by the roots next to a madness grape, with a teleporter that takes you straight to the gates of Raya Lucaria, home of the Serpentine Queen who crawls like a serpent and whose cursed children follow in kind. And if you look closely at the eyes of these juvenile scholars, you'll notice they have within their eyes what looks to be in striking likeness to the eye cancer, juvenile xanthogranuloma. And as I mentioned earlier, Ranni is the Snow Princess and deliverer of the Age of the Stars, who was guided by the snowy crone, and sports a snowy outfit with a snowflake-laden hat, and a modern ontological term used for the varied forms of specifically malignant cancer that make it the problem that it is malignant snowflake. Ranni is the malignant cancer, the rancorous spirit of collective generational hatred that cultivated her as an anomaly, the immortal cell that could cheat the system and break the rules to get revenge and uncage themselves from the prison of the cycle that was an eternal struggle of sacrifice and despair. Just like Miriel as a reverse St. Peter, this cancer would be a reverse cyclical rot. Rot is a part of the process of cycles wherein power is drawn and used from the death of life. And this is the system the Maidens of the cycle are caged within. And as is the pattern, this agent of the cycle would be used against the greater will to undo its grand design. The Maiden would become the rot, but not succumb to it, herself becoming an eternal element, and one that would in turn rot the system that attempted to contain her. The ancient Nox and astrologer-coded Blood Witch, with a veil like Marika's and a staff akin to the grandmother's tree, is asked by her spirit-projecting, shape-shifting twin or other self, the Witch of the Wheel.
Canst thou thine own child slay?
An answer which, if given the choice, would be for almost every mother, no. But what if by virtue of birthing a child, you were condemning it to death, or something worse such as a living sacrifice, like existing as a battery to extend the life or power of another, or a jarring ingredient to carry the sins of the guilty, or a sacrifice as a martyr, or in an ascension ritual? I believe this entire story is reflected in Revenant, who is a sacrificial maiden clutching a book, and whose immortal frame hides clues to the story of the Maidens of the cycle, by doing things an inanimate frame should not. For example, it seemingly resurrects one's teammates by way of rancorous spirits, exploding from her womb. Not to mention what I can only describe as the deathbed maiden outfit as an alternative to her heavily Nox-influenced design and attire, just like with Ranni and the serene smile of the roots mired in madness. Behind that facade of an innocent porcelain face is the intergenerational thirst for revenge, driven by the madness inflicted upon their lineage. And once again, that is the illusion of Miriel. Behind the facade of the kindly turtle pope and his silly hat is the silent lull into heresy, the very same serpent whose words of poison deceived Eve into the eclipse of humanity, that very same turtle whose beloved miracle is a charm far more selfish and far further reaching than Miquella's could ever be, even as a god, outright causing those you've wronged to forget your sins against them. That very same turtle whose legs don't work quite like they used to, rendering him cursed to forever be upon his belly. The curse of the Serpent of Eden. And if you believe, like many do, that this one-of-a-kind unique statue behind Miriel is a statue of Velka, then the fact that the function of this church is to embrace and forgive sin should strike you as incredibly important and telling, given that Velka is the god of sin. And while I'm always dubious of images that I see in walls, given how graves have been haunting me, of all of the different images or likenesses that could be seen on the turtle shell, that we know to represent the roots as per the talisman, what we see facing this statue of the goddess of sin, hidden behind Miriel like the statue itself, looks outrageously akin to a serpent. This wouldn't be the first time a turtle-coated priest lulled us onto the heretical dark path of the primordial serpent. If Miquella seeks to embrace all in the eternal kindness of gold, the system at its best and forever, then Ranni seeks to reject all to the cold silver of night, abandonment of the world to its own means, the death of the cycle, where sight and touch would be impossibilities. This multi-generational plan and Marika's final sacrifice is what allowed the shaman, the cutting gifted tribe, to take what should have always been theirs. Choice, the first and only true opportunity for a true Eden, as Miquella says in his endgame speech, and sacrifices everything for, just as his mother before him sacrificed her own eternity and godhood for her children, and for the multi-generational plan. Or the dark path, one guided by the primordial serpent and its gentle lull into the abyss of heresy, the collapse of the system and cycle of cruelty that demanded of the shaman, of the sacrificial maidens, more than anyone should ever have to give, time and time again with the intention of them struggling unto eternity, the sin of the power gained from the death of life. During the rule of cycles, with each awakening from rebirth, just as described on the juvenile scholar's outfit, memory faded into oblivion. But what would happen if you remembered? Each sacrifice, each seduction, and each betrayal. And what if, like the spirit tuner Roderica, you could see the spirits of the dead? Ranni's ending is the revenge of the rancorous, grafted intergenerational spite of the divinity caged within the cycle-bound sacrificial maidens, the lineage of Miranda. And that will be the topic of the next long-form video. But my very next video will be on Caligo, because where did these divine sacrificial maidens even come from? What do dragons have to do with flowers? And why is the punishment of those who partook in dragon communion the same as the punishment God inflicted on the Serpent of Eden? Thanks again to Miquella's alt account for the ovarian cancer observation, Kick6 for the eye cancer observation, and Metapho for the snake in the turtle shell, and so much more. I recommend checking out Mickey's channel as he has some amazing first videos, with many more videos and plenty of incredible ideas to come, with a sharp eye and mind behind them. I promise you, this isn't just a very elaborate burn account to pin part of the blame on for this potent McKellen propaganda. He is so much more than that, and worth checking out. I'd also recommend checking out Metapho's Discord server if you're interested in hyper in-depth looks at the game. Meta has fully invested themselves to the rabbit hole and is a trove of often missed details. They've blessed me with some of my favourite pieces of supporting and primary evidence for my theories. You can find his Discord server in the description. Blackcurrant Lore has an excellent video about the shaman and their ability to see the dead coming soon, so that is well worth looking out for. And if you prefer streaming, check out Kick6. He is a Souls and Lore veteran, multi-talented, a certified gnome, and one of my dearest friends. My next video will be on Caligo, and once my PC is back from being repaired, I will post my next long form on the lineage of Miranda,